The church bells had stopped ringing an hour ago. Eliza Carter stood alone at the altar, her hands trembling as they clutched a wilting bouquet of desert wildflowers. The white lace dress her mother had sewn by candlelight now clung to her skin, damp with sweat and humiliation. Her veil hung crooked, torn at the edge where she'd caught it on the church door in her frantic search for him. Victor Hale was gone. The pews behind her had emptied one by one, the townspeople shuffling out in awkward silence, their eyes heavy with pity or barely concealed amusement. She'd heard the whispers, sharp, cutting, designed to wound. Poor thing. I always knew he was too good for her. What kind of man leaves a woman at the altar? What kind of woman gets left? That last one cut the deepest. Eliza's best friend, Margaret, had tried to console her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and murmuring soft, useless words. But Eliza couldn't hear them. All she could hear was the silence where Victor's vows should have been, the silence where her future should have been. When the last person finally left, she stood alone in the chapel, staring at the empty space where he should have been standing. The preacher had awkwardly excused himself, muttering something about checking on the horses. Even he couldn't bear to witness her humiliation any longer. She wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse. Instead, she walked. Whoa. The sun was setting when Eliza finally stopped moving. She didn't know how far she'd gone. Miles, maybe. Her feet ached, her dress was shredded at the hem, and her carefully pinned hair had come loose, tumbling down her back in tangled waves. She'd kicked off her shoes somewhere along the way, delicate satin things that had no place in the wild. The frontier stretched endlessly around her, all red dust and sagebrush and jagged rock formations that looked like the bones of some long-dead giant. The sky was bruised purple and orange, the kind of beauty that would have taken her breath away if she had any breath left to give. She sank down onto a flat rock, her body finally giving out. Her hands were blistered, her throat was raw from the dry air. She hadn't brought water, hadn't brought anything, she'd just run. For the first time since the church, she let herself cry. Not the delicate, ladylike tears she'd been taught to produce at funerals and sad poetry readings. These were ugly, choking sobs that tore through her chest and left her gasping. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the man who'd promised her everything and delivered nothing, for the version of herself who'd believed him. When the tears finally stopped, the sky was fully dark. Eliza looked up at the stars, more stars than she'd ever seen in town, where the lanterns and fires dimmed their light. Out here, they blazed, infinite, indifferent. She was alone, truly, terrifyingly alone, and she had no idea what to do next. The sound of hooves broke the silence. Eliza's head snapped up, her heart hammering. She wasn't sure if she should be relieved or terrified. Out here, a stranger could be salvation or death, and there was no way to know which until it was too late. The rider appeared over the crest of a low hill, silhouetted against the stars. A man on a dark horse, moving slow and deliberate. He wasn't in a hurry. That fact alone set Eliza's nerves on edge. Men in a hurry were usually running from something. Men who took their time were usually hunting. He stopped a few yards away, studying her. Eliza forced herself to stand, even though her legs shook. She wouldn't meet whatever came next on her knees. "You lost?" His voice was low, rough, like gravel underfoot. "No." Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I know exactly where I am." "Do you?" It wasn't a question. The man swung down from his horse with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was tall, taller than Victor, though that wasn't saying much. Broad-shouldered with the kind of build that came from hard labor, not leisure. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the set of his mouth. He didn't look friendly. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said, closing the distance between them with slow, measured steps. "And unless I'm mistaken, that's a wedding dress." Eliza's hands instinctively moved to smooth the ruined fabric, then stopped. What was the point? "It was," she said. "Was. The wedding didn't happen." "I can see that." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see his eyes now. Dark, unreadable, scanning her like she was a problem to be solved. "You got family in town?" he asked. "No." Friends? Not anymore. Money? No. He let out a slow breath, something that might have been frustration or resignation. It was hard to tell. So you ran out into the desert in a wedding dress with no plan, no supplies, and no destination. That about sums it up. For a moment, he just looked at her. Then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You're either brave or stupid, he said. Maybe both. Yeah. He tipped his hat back, revealing more of his face. It was a hard face, weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many harsh dawns. But there was something else there, too. Something that looked almost like respect. Maybe both. He turned back toward his horse, and for a moment Eliza thought he was going to leave her there. Panic flared in her chest. Wait. He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Please. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She'd never begged for anything in her life. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. I need help. I can see that. Then help me. He studied her for a long moment, weighing something she couldn't see. What's your name? He asked. Eliza. Eliza Carter. Caleb Boone. He didn't offer his hand. I've got a ranch about 10 miles north of here. I need a wife. Eliza blinked. I'm sorry? A wife, he repeated, as if it were the most practical thing in the world. Someone to manage the house, cook, help with the books, keep things running when I'm out with the herd. You're asking me to marry you? I'm offering you a job, he corrected. Marriage is just the legal framework. Keeps things simple. Keeps people from talking. Eliza stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. This man, this complete stranger, was proposing marriage like it was a business transaction. No romance, no promises. Just cold, hard practicality. You don't even know me, she said. Don't need to. You need shelter. I need help. That's all that matters. That's insane. Maybe, he shrugged. But you're the one standing in the middle of nowhere in a torn wedding dress. I'd say your options are limited. He wasn't wrong. Eliza's mind raced. She could refuse. She could walk back to town, face the whispers and the pity, try to rebuild some kind of life from the wreckage Victor had left behind. But what kind of life would that be? She had no money, no prospects, no family to fall back on. In a town like this, a woman alone was either a charity case or a target. Or she could say yes. She could walk into the unknown with a man she didn't know, into a life she couldn't imagine. It was terrifying, reckless, possibly the stupidest thing she'd ever do. But it was a choice. Her choice. What if I say no? She asked quietly. Caleb's expression didn't change. Then I wish you luck, Miss Carter. You're going to need it. He moved toward his horse again, and this time Eliza knew he wouldn't stop. Wait. He paused. Eliza took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her like a physical thing. This was it. The line between her old life and whatever came next. I'll do it, she said. I'll marry you. Caleb turned back, his eyes searching hers. You sure? No. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. But I'm doing it anyway. For the first time, something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Good enough, he said. Get on the horse. No. They rode through the night in silence. Eliza sat behind Caleb, her arms wrapped awkwardly around his waist, trying not to think about the fact that she was pressed against a stranger. The horse moved with a steady, ground-eating pace, and the desert rolled past in shadowy waves. The air grew colder, and Eliza shivered in her thin dress. Without a word, Caleb shrugged out of his jacket and handed it back to her. Thank you, she murmured, pulling it on. It smelled like leather and smoke, and something else. Something clean and sharp, like sage after rain. He didn't respond. As the miles passed, Eliza's exhaustion caught up with her. Her head drooped, and despite herself, she found her cheek resting against Caleb's back. She could feel the rise and fall of his breathing, steady and sure. It was strangely comforting. Just before she drifted off, she heard him speak. You'll be safe, he said quietly. I promise you that much. Eliza didn't answer. She wasn't sure she believed him, but she wanted to. Dawn was breaking when they finally arrived at the ranch. Eliza stirred as the horse slowed, blinking sleep from her eyes. The first thing she saw was the house, a low, sprawling structure built from rough-hewn timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, built to last. Beyond the house, the land stretched out in every direction, endless acres of open range dotted with cattle that looked like dark smudges against the pale grass. In the distance, she could see mountains, jagged peaks still capped with snow, even in late spring. It was beautiful and utterly isolated. Caleb dismounted and held out a hand to help her down. Eliza hesitated for just a moment before taking it. His grip was strong, calloused, and he set her on her feet with an efficiency that felt almost impersonal. "Welcome home," he said, though there was no warmth in his voice. Just fact. Eliza looked around, taking it all in. The barn, the corral, the well, the chicken coop. Everything was neat, organized, functional. This was a working ranch, not a homestead built for comfort. "Come on," Caleb said, leading her toward the house. "I'll show you around." The inside was as practical as the outside. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a heavy wooden table, and 2 bedrooms, one large, one small. The walls were bare except for a few hooks for coats and hats. No pictures, no decorations, no softness. "You'll take the smaller room," Caleb said, nodding toward it. "I'll stay in the other. We keep things separate. Clear boundaries." "Of course," Eliza said, though the words felt strange in her mouth. This was a marriage, wasn't it? Even if it was one in name only. Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. "This isn't about that," he said bluntly. "I'm not looking for a wife in the traditional sense. I'm looking for a partner. Someone I can count on. Someone who can hold their own." "I understand." "Do you?" Eliza met his eyes, lifting her chin. "I didn't come here expecting romance, Mr. Boone. I came here because I had no other choice. But I'm not going to be a burden. I'll earn my keep." Something shifted in his expression, just a flicker, but it was there. "Good," he said, "because out here there's no room for dead weight. You pull your share, or you don't survive. It's that simple. I'll manage." "We'll see." He left her then, heading back outside to tend to the horse. Eliza stood alone in the small, bare room, looking at the narrow bed, the single window, the empty walls. This was her life now. She sank down onto the bed, still wearing Caleb's jacket, and stared at the floor. What had she done? The first days were brutal. Eliza had grown up in town, the daughter of a seamstress and a bookkeeper. She knew how to read, how to sew, how to manage a household budget, but she didn't know how to survive on a frontier ranch. Caleb didn't coddle her. He woke her before dawn, handed her a list of chores, and expected them done by sundown. Feeding the chickens, hauling water from the well, scrubbing floors, washing clothes in a tub outside, cooking meals over the temperamental stove that seemed determined to either burn everything or leave it raw. Her hands blistered, her back ached, her arms felt like lead. But she didn't complain. Caleb worked harder than she did, up before the sun and not stopping until long after dark. He mended fences, herded cattle, broke horses, repaired the barn roof. He moved with the kind of relentless efficiency that came from years of doing everything alone. He rarely spoke to her except to give instructions. When they ate, it was in silence. When they passed each other during the day, he might nod, but that was all. Eliza told herself it was fine. This was the deal. She hadn't expected warmth, but the loneliness was crushing. One evening, about a week after she'd arrived, Eliza was washing dishes when Caleb came in from the barn. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the darkening land. "You did good today," he said quietly. Eliza froze, a plate halfway to the drying rack. "What?" "The corral fence. I saw you fix the broken slat." "Oh." She set the plate down carefully. "It wasn't much." "It was something." He didn't look at her, but there was something in his tone, something that might have been approval, maybe even gratitude. "Thank you," Eliza said softly. Caleb nodded once, drained his coffee, and headed to his room. It wasn't much, but it was the first real acknowledgement he'd given her since she'd arrived. and somehow it made the loneliness a little easier to bear. 2 weeks in, the trouble started. Eliza was in the chicken coop gathering eggs when she heard the sound of hooves. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. 3 riders were approaching from the east, moving at an easy lope. Caleb appeared from the barn, his expression unreadable, but Eliza noticed the way his hand drifted toward the rifle leaning against the fence post. "Stay behind me," he said quietly as she approached. The riders stopped a few yards away. They were rough-looking men, the kind Eliza had learned to avoid in town. Unshaven, hard-eyed, with gun belts slung low on their hips. The one in front tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Afternoon, Boone." "Jack." Caleb's voice was flat. "What do you want?" "Just passing through. Thought we'd check in, see how you're managing." "I'm managing fine." Jack's eyes slid past Caleb, landing on Eliza. His smile widened. "Well, well, you went and got yourself hitched. Didn't think you had it in you." My wife's none of your concern." "Wife, huh?" Jack leaned forward in his saddle, studying Eliza like she was livestock. "Pretty thing. Where'd you find her?" "Doesn't matter." "Sure it does. See, word around town is that a certain Miss Carter ran off after getting stood up at the altar. That wouldn't be her, would it?" Eliza's blood went cold. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I said it's none of your concern." "Easy, Boone, just making conversation." Jack's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But you might want to keep a closer eye on your herd. Heard there's been some trouble with rustlers lately. Would be a shame if you lost any cattle." "I can handle my own." "I'm sure you can." Jack tipped his hat again. "See you around, Mrs. Boone." The 3 men turned their horses and rode off, their laughter carrying on the wind. Caleb watched them until they disappeared over a rise. Then he turned to Eliza. "You know those men?" he asked. "No, but I know the type." "Stay away from them. And if they come back when I'm not here, you lock the doors and you don't open them for anyone. Understand?" Eliza nodded, her heart still pounding. Caleb picked up his rifle and headed back toward the barn. "Caleb?" He stopped, glancing back. What did he mean about rustlers? For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "There's been trouble. Cattle going missing, fences cut, small ranchers getting squeezed out." He paused. "It's organized. Someone's running an operation, and they're not going to stop until they control all the land around here." "And you think those men are part of it?" "I know they are." "Then why didn't you—" "Because I'm one man, Eliza, and there's 3 of them, plus whoever else is backing them. I pick a fight I can't win, and we both end up dead." He walked away before she could respond. Eliza stood there, the basket of eggs still in her hands, and looked out at the horizon. For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt something other than exhaustion or loneliness. She felt afraid. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the ranch. The wind, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the house settling. And underneath it all, the faint sound of Caleb moving around in the other room. She wondered if he was sleeping, if he ever slept, or if he spent his nights like this, awake and watchful, waiting for the next threat to appear. She thought about the men who'd come today, about the way they'd looked at her, at the ranch, like they were already planning how to take it. And she thought about Victor, not with longing or heartbreak, but with a sharp, sudden clarity. Victor had wanted a wife who would make him look good, who would smile and nod and never ask questions, who would be an ornament, not a person. Caleb wanted a partner. He'd been clear about that from the start, and even though their relationship was distant, even though he barely spoke to her, he'd never once treated her like she was less than him. He'd given her work, yes, hard work, but he'd also given her respect. And in a strange way, that meant more than all of Victor's pretty words ever had. Eliza rolled onto her side, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she'd survive out here, didn't know if the rustlers would come back, didn't know if she and Caleb would ever be more than 2 strangers sharing a roof. But for the first time since the church, she felt something that might have been hope, not for rescue, for the chance to prove herself. The days turned into weeks, and Eliza began to find her rhythm. She learned to read the sky for weather, to tell when a chicken was sick, to bake bread that didn't come out like a brick. She learned to milk the cow without getting kicked, to chop wood without blistering her hands as much, to mend a fence post so it would hold. Caleb still didn't talk much, but he started leaving her small signs of acknowledgement. A cup of coffee already poured when she woke up. A stack of firewood he'd chopped and left by the stove. A book, battered and old but still readable, left on the kitchen table one morning with no explanation. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it wasn't coldness either. It was something. One afternoon, Eliza was in the kitchen when she heard shouting from the barn. She dropped the knife she'd been using to peel potatoes and ran outside. Caleb was in the corral, working with a young stallion. The horse was wild-eyed and bucking, hooves flashing dangerously close to Caleb's head. But he didn't back down. He moved with the horse, speaking in low, steady tones, waiting for the moment when the animal's fear would break. Eliza watched, her heart in her throat, as Caleb finally got a hand on the horse's neck. The stallion shuddered, still tense, but no longer fighting. "Easy," Caleb murmured. "Easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you." Slowly, carefully, he ran his hand down the horse's flank. The animal's breathing steadied. It was the gentlest Eliza had ever seen him. When he finally stepped back, the horse stood quiet, watching him with dark, liquid eyes. Caleb turned and saw Eliza by the fence. For a moment, something like embarrassment flickered across his face, as if he'd been caught doing something private. "Didn't mean to disturb you," Eliza said quickly. "You didn't." He climbed over the fence, landing beside her. "That's Ghost. Found him running wild in the hills last year. Been trying to gentle him ever since. He trusts you." "Not yet, but he's getting there." They stood together in silence, watching the horse. "You're good with him," Eliza said. Caleb shrugged. "Horses are easier than people. You just have to be patient, consistent. Show them you're not a threat." "Is that how you see me?" Eliza asked before she could stop herself. "As a threat?" Caleb looked at her, surprised. "No." "Then why do you keep me at arm's length?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he sighed, leaning against the fence. "Because the last person I let close," he said quietly, "left me with nothing but scars." Eliza's breath caught. "What happened?" "Doesn't matter. It was a long time ago." He pushed off the fence, heading toward the barn. "I made a rule after that. Don't get attached. Don't expect anything. Keep things simple. And I complicate things." He paused, glancing back. "You're here, aren't you? That's complicated enough." He disappeared into the barn, leaving Eliza alone with the wind and the quiet horse. She didn't know what had happened to him, didn't know who had hurt him badly enough to make him build walls this high. But she understood walls. She'd built plenty of her own. That night, as they sat across from each other at dinner, Eliza made a decision. "I want to learn to shoot," she said. Caleb looked up from his plate, eyebrows raised. "What?" "A gun. I want to learn how to use one." "Why?" "Because if those men come back, I don't want to hide behind locked doors. I want to be able to defend myself. Defend this place." Caleb set down his fork, studying her. "You ever fired a gun before?" "No." "It's not like in stories. It's loud. It kicks. And if you're not careful, you can hurt yourself worse than any enemy could." "Then teach me to be careful." He was silent for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. "All right, tomorrow morning, we'll start with the rifle." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Caleb said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. "You might hate it." "I doubt that." His smile widened, just a fraction. "We'll see." The next morning, Caleb handed her the rifle. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cold against her palms. He showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. "Focus on the target," he said, standing behind her. "Not the gun, not the noise, just the target." Eliza lined up the shot, her heart pounding. She took a breath, held it, and fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, making her stumble back. The shot went wide, kicking up dust 20 feet from the target. "Again," Caleb said calmly. She fired again and again and again. By the 10th shot, her shoulder was bruised and her ears were ringing, but she hit the target. Caleb nodded, approval clear in his eyes. "Not bad." "Not good either." You'll get there. It takes time. They practiced every morning after that, and slowly, painfully, Eliza got better. She learned to anticipate the recoil, to steady her breathing, to trust her aim, and with every shot, she felt a little less like the girl who'd been left at the altar, and a little more like someone who could survive anything. It was midsummer when the rustlers struck. Eliza woke to the sound of cattle bellowing in panic. She threw on her clothes and ran outside to find Caleb already by the corral, rifle in hand, staring out at the dark fields. "What's happening?" she asked. "They're running the herd," he said grimly, "trying to scatter them." In the distance, Eliza could see shapes moving, riders, pushing the cattle toward the open range. If they succeeded, it would take days to round them all up again. Days they didn't have. "What do we do?" Eliza asked. Caleb looked at her, then at the rifle still leaning against the porch. "Can you shoot from horseback?" "I don't know. I've never tried." "Then tonight you learn." He saddled 2 horses in record time, handing her the reins to the smaller mare. Eliza swung up, her hands shaking with adrenaline, and followed Caleb out into the darkness. The ride was chaos. They raced through the night, the horses' hooves pounding the earth, the wind tearing at Eliza's hair. Ahead, the rustlers were whooping and shouting, driving the cattle into a stampede. Caleb pulled up alongside her. "Fire into the air," he shouted over the noise. "Scare them off!" Eliza raised the rifle, braced it against her shoulder, and fired. The shot cracked through the night, and one of the rustlers looked back, startled. She fired again, and the man cursed, yanking his horse around. "That's it," Caleb yelled. "Keep going!" They rode hard, firing into the air, herding the cattle back toward the ranch. The rustlers realized they were outnumbered, or at least outgunned, and peeled off, disappearing into the darkness with angry shouts. By the time the sun rose, the herd was back, exhausted, scattered, but safe. Eliza slid off her horse, her legs shaking so badly she nearly collapsed. Caleb caught her arm, steadying her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, breathless. "I think so." He smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. "You did good, Eliza." And in that moment, standing in the pale morning light with dust in her hair and victory in her veins, Eliza Carter felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt alive. The victory over the rustlers should have brought relief. Instead, it brought tension that settled over the ranch like a storm cloud that refused to break. Caleb spent the next 3 days riding the perimeter, checking fences, looking for signs of another attack. He came back each night later than the last, his face drawn, his eyes hard. Eliza would have dinner waiting, but he barely touched it, just sat at the table, staring at nothing, his mind clearly elsewhere. On the 4th night, Eliza had had enough. "You can't keep this up," she said, setting a plate of stew in front of him with more force than necessary. "You're going to work yourself into the ground." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't slept in days." "I'll sleep when I know we're safe." "And when will that be?" Eliza demanded. "When you collapse. When those men come back and find you too exhausted to fight." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen." "You don't know that." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "What do you want me to say, Eliza? That I'm worried? That I don't know how to stop what's coming? Fine, I'm worried. But worrying doesn't fix anything. Work does. Work isn't going to save you if you're too tired to see straight." They stood facing each other across the kitchen, the air crackling with unspoken frustration. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Eliza's expression stopped him. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "This isn't your fight. You didn't sign up for this. You could leave, go back to town, start over somewhere safer." Eliza stared at him, feeling something hot and fierce rise in her chest. "Is that what you think? That I'm just here because I have nowhere else to go? Aren't you?" "Maybe I was," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "At first. But that's not why I'm staying. Then why?" She took a breath, searching for the right words. "Because this place matters. Because you gave me a chance when no one else would. Because I'm not the kind of person who runs when things get hard." Caleb's expression softened, just slightly. "You already ran once." I ran from humiliation, from a man who didn't deserve me. That's different. She stepped closer, holding his gaze. I'm not running from this. From you. Not unless you tell me to go. For a long moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he let out a slow breath and sank back into his chair. I'm not telling you to go, he said quietly. Good. Eliza sat down across from him. Then eat your dinner and get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about the rustlers together. Together. Yes. Whether you like it or not, we're partners. Remember? The corner of his mouth twitched. Hard to forget. They finished the meal in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less distant, more companionable. When Caleb finally went to bed, Eliza stayed up, cleaning the dishes and thinking about what she'd said. She hadn't planned to say any of it. The words had just come tumbling out, raw and honest. But she didn't regret them, because somewhere along the way, without her quite realizing it, this ranch had stopped being just a refuge. It had become something more. It had become home. The next morning brought visitors of a different sort. Eliza was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She shaded her eyes and saw an older couple riding toward the house, their wagon loaded with supplies. Caleb emerged from the barn, his expression wary but not hostile. That's the Hendersons, he said. They run the ranch to the west. Good people. The wagon pulled up, and the man driving it, a gray-haired fellow with kind eyes and weathered hands, tipped his hat. Morning, Caleb. Ben, Mary. Caleb nodded to the woman beside him, a stout, no-nonsense type with a warm smile. What brings you out this way? Heard you had some trouble with rustlers, Ben said, climbing down from the wagon. Wanted to check in, see if you needed anything. We managed. I'm sure you did. But managing alone and managing well are two different things. Ben's eyes shifted to Eliza, and his expression brightened. And this must be the new Mrs. Boone. Word travels fast out here. Eliza felt her cheeks warm. Eliza, it's nice to meet you. Mary climbed down with surprising agility for her age and came straight over, taking Eliza's hands in hers. My dear, you're even prettier than they said, and brave too, from what I hear. Ran off a pack of rustlers on horseback? I just fired a few shots, Eliza said modestly. Don't sell yourself short, Mary said firmly. Most women would have hidden in the cellar. You rode out and fought. That takes spine. Caleb looked almost embarrassed by the praise. We got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it, Ben said. But luck won't hold forever. Those rustlers aren't going to give up. They've been hitting every small rancher in the territory, squeezing people out so they can take over the land. I know. Then you know you can't fight them alone. Ben glanced between Caleb and Eliza. There's going to be a meeting next week at the Hendersons' place. All the ranchers who've been hit. We need to organize, share information, maybe even pool resources for a defense. Caleb frowned. I don't need... Yes, you do, Mary interrupted. And so do we. So does everyone. Pride won't keep your cattle safe, Caleb Boone. And it won't keep your wife safe either. Caleb's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. We'll think about it, Eliza said, stepping in before the silence grew too awkward. Thank you for coming all this way to tell us. Of course, dear. Mary patted her hand. And if you need anything, anything at all, you come find us. It's a hard life out here, but it's easier when you've got neighbors you can count on. They stayed for coffee, and Eliza found herself warming to them immediately. Mary had a sharp wit and a wealth of stories about life on the frontier, while Ben had a quiet wisdom that reminded her a little of Caleb. They spoke of their children, grown now, scattered across the territory, and their grandchildren, and the years they'd spent building their ranch from nothing. When they finally left, Eliza watched their wagon disappear over the hill with a strange ache in her chest. They're good people, she said softly. They are. Caleb stood beside her, his arms crossed. But they're right. We can't do this alone. So we'll go to the meeting? He hesitated, then nodded. We'll go. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Caleb spent every spare moment reinforcing the ranch's defenses, fixing weak spots in the fence, setting up better vantage points, even rigging a simple alarm system using bells and tripwire that would alert them if anyone approached at night. Eliza helped where she could, but she also focused on something else, improving her shooting. Every morning, before the sun was fully up, she practiced. Caleb had set up targets at varying distances, and she worked her way through them methodically, learning to compensate for wind and distance and her own nerves. One morning, Caleb joined her carrying his own rifle. He didn't say anything, just took up a position beside her and started shooting. They fell into a rhythm, the crack of gunfire punctuating the quiet dawn. When they paused to reload, Caleb glanced at her targets. "You're getting better," he said. "Still not as good as you. You don't need to be as good as me. You just need to be good enough to make someone think twice." Eliza chambered another round. "And if they don't think twice, then you make them regret it." She fired, and this time the bullet punched through the center of the target. Caleb made a sound that might have been approval. "What made you so good with a gun?" Eliza asked, lowering the rifle. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Necessity. I grew up in rough country. My father taught me to shoot before I could read. Said a man who couldn't defend himself wasn't much of a man." "And your mother?" His expression shuddered. "She died when I was 10. Fever took her." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." He raised his rifle again, ending the conversation. But Eliza filed the information away. Another small piece of the puzzle that was Caleb Boone. The night before the meeting, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. Would the other ranchers be willing to work together? Or would pride and stubbornness tear them apart before they even had a chance to fight back? She must have dozed off eventually because she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Caleb moving around in the kitchen. When she emerged, he was already dressed, his rifle cleaned and ready by the door. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." They shared a look of mutual understanding. The ride to the Hendersons' ranch took most of the morning. The land gradually shifted from open range to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and juniper. The Hendersons' place was larger than Caleb's, with a main house, a bunkhouse for hired hands, and a big barn that looked like it had weathered 100 storms. There were already a dozen horses tied up outside when they arrived. Caleb helped Eliza down from her horse, and they walked together toward the barn, where voices drifted out through the open doors. Inside, a group of ranchers had gathered around a makeshift table, really just planks laid across sawhorses. Ben Henderson stood at one end, talking in low tones with a tall, lean man Eliza didn't recognize. Mary was pouring coffee from a huge pot, greeting each arrival with a warm smile. When Caleb and Eliza entered, the conversations died down. All eyes turned to them. "Caleb," Ben said, his face lighting up. "Glad you could make it." "And Mrs. Boone, welcome." Eliza nodded, acutely aware of the scrutiny. Some of the faces were curious, others skeptical. One man in particular, a burly fellow with a thick beard, looked openly hostile. "Didn't know we were letting women into war councils now," the man said, his tone dripping with condescension. Caleb's expression went cold. "My wife's been riding and shooting beside me. She's earned her place here more than most." "Your wife, huh?" The man smirked. "Heard she got left at the altar a few months back. Must have been desperate to marry a hermit like you." The room went dead silent. Caleb took a step forward, his hand moving toward his belt. But Eliza put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "You're right," she said calmly, looking the man straight in the eye. "I was desperate enough to leave behind a man who was all talk and no substance. So I came out here and found one who actually knows how to work, how to fight, how to stand by his word." She paused. "Can you say the same?" A few of the other ranchers chuckled. The bearded man's face flushed red, but he didn't respond. Ben cleared his throat. "All right, let's settle down and get to business. We're all here for the same reason. The rustlers are bleeding us dry, and if we don't do something, we'll all lose everything we've built." The conversation shifted, and Eliza found herself a chair near the back, content to listen. The ranchers talked about losses, cattle stolen, fences cut, barns burned. The pattern was clear. The rustlers were systematic, targeting isolated ranches and overwhelming them with numbers. "They're not just stealing," one rancher said bitterly. "They're trying to drive us out, make us sell cheap so someone can buy up the land." "Who?" Caleb asked. "That's the question, isn't it?" Ben said. "No one knows for sure, but there's been talk of a syndicate moving in from back east. Rich men who want to turn this whole territory into one big cattle empire. And we're in the way, another rancher added. So what do we do? Eliza asked, surprising herself. All eyes turned to her again. I'm sorry, I don't mean to intrude, but sitting here talking about the problem doesn't solve it. We need a plan. Ben nodded approvingly. The lady's right. We need to organize patrols, share information. If they hit one of us, the others ride to help. That's all well and good, the bearded man, Eliza had learned his name was Tucker, said. But what happens when they come with 20 men instead of 5? We gonna ride into a slaughter? We set traps, Caleb said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. They're predictable. They scout, they wait for the right moment, then they strike fast. But if we know they're coming, we can be ready. Turn their tactics against them. How? Tucker demanded. Lookouts, alarm systems, and we hit back hard. Make it cost them more than it's worth. The room buzzed with murmured conversation. Some of the ranchers looked intrigued. Others looked doubtful. It's risky, Ben said, but it might be our best shot. They talked for another hour, hashing out details. Who would patrol which areas? How to signal for help? What to do if someone was attacked? By the time they finished, the sun was sinking low, and Eliza's head was spinning with information. As they prepared to leave, Mary pulled Eliza aside. You did well in there, she said. Don't let men like Tucker make you doubt yourself. You belong here as much as any of them. Thank you, Eliza said. That means a lot. Mary squeezed her hand. And take care of that husband of yours. He's a good man, but he carries too much alone. He needs someone like you. Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. The ride home was quiet. The sky had turned a deep purple, and stars were beginning to appear. Eliza's body ached from the long day, but her mind was restless. You didn't have to defend me, Caleb said suddenly. Eliza glanced at him. What? With Tucker. I could have handled it. I know, but I wanted to. She paused. He wasn't just insulting me. He was insulting you too. And I wasn't going to let that stand. Caleb was silent for a moment. Then he said, Thank you. You're welcome. They rode a little further, and then Caleb spoke again. You asked a good question back there, about what we do. Most people would have just sat quiet. I'm not most people. No, Caleb said, and there was something in his voice, something warm, almost fond. You're not. The compliment settled over Eliza like a blanket, warming her from the inside out. 2 days later, the alarm bells rang in the middle of the night. Eliza bolted upright, her heart hammering. She grabbed her rifle, always kept loaded now, always within reach, and ran to the window. Outside, she could see shadows moving near the corral. Caleb burst into her room without knocking. Stay low, and don't shoot unless you're sure of your target. Where are you going? To see what we're dealing with. Not alone, you're not. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. Together they slipped out the back door and made their way toward the barn, keeping to the shadows. There were 3 men this time, trying to open the corral gate. One of them had a torch, the flame casting flickering light across their faces. Eliza recognized one of them. It was Jack, the man who'd come by weeks ago with his veiled threats. Caleb raised his rifle, taking aim. But before he could fire, one of the horses, Ghost, the wild stallion, let out a shrill whinny and reared, startling the rustlers. Who's there? Jack shouted, drawing his gun. Caleb fired a warning shot into the air. Get off my land! The rustlers scattered, but Jack held his ground, peering into the darkness. That you, Boone? Thought you'd learned your lesson. Only lesson I learned is that you're all cowards who can't fight fair. Jack laughed. Fair's for fools. We're taking what we want, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. I wouldn't be so sure, Eliza said, stepping out from the shadows with her rifle aimed at Jack's chest. Jack's eyes widened in surprise. Then he grinned. Well, the little lady's got teeth. More than teeth, Eliza said. Now drop your gun and get out, or I'll drop you instead. For a moment, Jack looked like he might call her bluff, but something in her eyes must have convinced him otherwise. He holstered his gun slowly, his grin fading. This isn't over, he said. No, Caleb agreed. It's not. But next time you come here, you better bring more than 3 men, because we're ready for you." Jack spat on the ground and turned, whistling for his companions. They mounted up and rode off into the darkness, their laughter echoing back across the empty land. When they were gone, Eliza lowered her rifle, her hands shaking. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "I think so." She let out a shaky breath. "I really thought I was going to have to shoot him." "Would you have?" Eliza met his eyes. "Yes." Caleb nodded, something like pride in his expression. "I believe you." They stood there for a moment, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "This is going to get worse, isn't it?" Eliza asked quietly. "Yeah," Caleb said. "It is." "Then we better be ready." He looked at her, really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're not the same person who showed up here in a torn wedding dress." "No," Eliza agreed. "I'm not." "Good," Caleb said. And then to her surprise, he smiled. "Because I like this version better." Warmth bloomed in Eliza's chest, unexpected and fierce. She wanted to say something, to tell him that she liked this version of herself better too, that she was grateful for the chance to become it. But the words stuck in her throat, so she just smiled back. And for now, that was enough. The raids continued over the next few weeks, but they were more cautious now. The rustlers knew the ranchers were organizing, and they adjusted their tactics. Instead of direct attacks, they focused on sabotage, cutting fences, poisoning water sources, setting small fires that had to be put out before they spread. It was exhausting, demoralizing work, but it also brought the ranchers closer together. They set up a rotation of patrols, with riders from different ranches checking in on each other regularly. Information flowed freely now, sightings of strangers, unusual activity, anything that might signal an attack. Eliza found herself in the middle of it all, riding out with Caleb on patrols, helping coordinate supply runs, even tending to injuries when fights broke out. The other ranchers' wives had started coming by, bringing food and gossip and companionship. Eliza discovered that she liked these women, tough, practical, with a dark sense of humor born from years of hard living. She was becoming part of a community, and it felt good. One evening, Caleb came home with news. "Ben got word from a contact in town," he said, his expression grim. "The rustlers are planning something big, a coordinated attack on multiple ranches at once." Eliza's stomach dropped. "When?" "Soon. Maybe a week. Maybe less." "Then we need to be ready." "We will be." Caleb hesitated, then reached out and took her hand. The gesture was so unexpected that Eliza froze. "But if things go bad, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll run. Get on a horse and ride for the Hendersons. Don't look back." Eliza pulled her hand away, anger flaring. "Absolutely not." "Eliza, no, I'm not running. Not from this. Not from you. We stand together or we don't stand at all. This isn't about pride. It's about survival." "It's about both," Eliza shot back. "And I'm not leaving you to face this alone. So stop asking." They stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said. "Good thing you married me then." Despite everything, he laughed. It was a short, rough sound, but genuine. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it is." That night, as Eliza lay in bed, she thought about what Mary had said, about Caleb carrying too much alone, about him needing someone like her. And she realized, with a clarity that took her breath away, that she needed him too. Not because he'd saved her, but because he'd given her the space to save herself. And somewhere in that space, she'd found something she never expected. She'd found a partner, an equal, someone who saw her strength and respected it, even when it challenged him. She'd found someone worth fighting for. The storm was coming. Eliza could feel it in the air, in the tension that crackled through every conversation, every glance. But when it broke, she would be ready. They both would be. The warning came 3 days later, delivered by a young ranch hand who rode his horse nearly to death, getting there. Eliza saw him coming from the kitchen window, the horse lathered and stumbling, the rider slumped forward in the saddle. She ran outside, calling for Caleb. By the time he emerged from the barn, she was already helping the boy down. He couldn't have been more than 16, his face pale and streaked with dirt. "They're coming," he gasped. "Tonight. Maybe 20 men, maybe more. They hit the Patterson Ranch at dawn, burned it to the ground." Caleb's expression went hard as stone. "Anyone hurt?" "Patterson and his sons fought back. 2 of the boys are dead. Patterson's wife and daughter got away, but just barely." The boy swayed on his feet, and Eliza steadied him. "Mr. Henderson sent me to warn everyone. He's gathering men at his place, says we make our stand there." "How many can he count on?" Caleb asked. "Maybe a dozen ranchers, some hired hands. Not enough." The boy looked up at Caleb with desperate eyes. "But it's all we got." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he nodded. "Tell Ben we'll be there. Give us an hour to prepare." The boy nodded and would have collapsed if Eliza hadn't caught him. "Get him some water," Caleb said, "and food if he can keep it down. His horse needs tending too." Eliza guided the boy into the house while Caleb disappeared into the barn. Her mind was racing. Tonight. They were coming tonight. She'd known it was inevitable, but knowing and facing it were 2 very different things. She got the boy settled with bread and water, then went to find Caleb. He was in the barn checking ammunition, his movements quick and efficient. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. He looked up and something flickered in his eyes, fear, maybe, or regret. "Pack light. Essentials only. We might not be coming back here for a while." "And if we don't come back at all?" "Then it won't matter what we left behind." Eliza nodded, refusing to let the fear show on her face. "I'll be ready." She turned to go, but Caleb's voice stopped her. "Eliza." She looked back. "I meant what I said before. If things go bad, you run. You find the nearest town and you disappear. Start over somewhere they'll never find you." "We've had this conversation." "I know, but I need you to hear me." He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, taking her by the shoulders. "These men, they're not playing games anymore. They're here to kill anyone who stands in their way. And if they get their hands on you, they won't. You don't know that." "Neither do you." She met his eyes, unflinching. "I'm not running, Caleb. Whatever happens tonight, we face it together. That's final." For a moment she thought he might argue. Then his grip on her shoulders tightened and he pulled her into an embrace so sudden it took her breath away. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, then wrapped her arms around him, holding on tight. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said against her hair, his voice rough. "Not if you keep me alive." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and what she saw in his face made her chest ache. Fear, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked almost like devotion. "I'll try," he said quietly. "That's all I ask." They stood there for a moment longer, neither wanting to let go. Then reality crashed back in, and they pulled apart, the moment broken but not forgotten. An hour later, they were ready. Eliza had packed a saddlebag with clothes, ammunition, what little money they had, and the book Caleb had given her weeks ago. She didn't know why she grabbed it, only that it felt important. Caleb had loaded both horses with supplies and weapons, moving with the practiced efficiency of a man preparing for war. The young ranch hand, his name was Tommy, Eliza had learned, was looking better after rest and food. Caleb sent him ahead with fresh horse, telling him they'd follow within the hour. When he was gone, Caleb did one final check of the ranch. He let the chickens loose, opened the corral gates so the horses could flee if they needed to, scattered the cattle so they wouldn't be easy targets. It was like watching someone say goodbye to a life they'd built with their bare hands. Eliza stood on the porch, looking at the house that had become her home, the kitchen where she'd learned to cook, the bedroom where she'd spent so many sleepless nights, the land that had tested her and forged her into someone stronger. "Ready?" Caleb asked, appearing beside her. "No," she said honestly. "But let's go anyway." They rode hard toward the Henderson Ranch, the sun sinking lower with every mile. The landscape was bathed in orange and gold, beautiful and terrible, like the world itself was holding its breath. When they arrived, chaos greeted them. The Henderson place had been transformed into a fortress. Wagons had been overturned to create barricades, windows had been boarded up with gun slots cut through, and men were everywhere, checking weapons, filling water barrels, digging trenches. Eliza counted at least 15 armed men, maybe more inside the house. Ben Henderson met them at the gate, his face grim but determined. "Glad you made it. We're going to need every gun we can get." "How long do we have?" Caleb asked, dismounting. "Could be an hour, could be 3. Scouts said they were gathering at the old Miller property, about 10 miles east. Once they move, they'll move fast." "What's the plan?" Ben gestured toward the main house. "We hold here. They want to fight, we give them one. But on our terms, in a place we can defend. And if they try to burn us out, then we've got water ready. And if it comes to it, we've got a fallback position in the root cellar. Women and children go there first." Eliza bristled at that, but said nothing. Now wasn't the time to argue about where she belonged. Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. "Eliza shoots better than half the men here. She stays with me." Ben looked surprised, but nodded. "Your call, but keep her back from the front line." "I'll be wherever I'm needed," Eliza said firmly. Both men looked at her, and she held their gazes without flinching. "I didn't come here to hide." Ben's expression softened. "Mary said you had steel in you. Looks like she was right." He turned to Caleb. "Take position on the east barricade. That's where they're most likely to hit first." They found their spot behind an overturned wagon, where they had a clear view of the approach. Other ranchers were spread out along the perimeter, faces tense, weapons ready. Eliza recognized some of them from the meeting. Tucker was there, scowling as usual, along with the Patterson brothers, who'd survived the attack on their ranch. Their faces were hard and cold, their eyes empty of everything but the need for revenge. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit inside the house but kept low. No one wanted to give the rustlers easy targets. The night sounds of the frontier, crickets, distant coyotes, the wind in the grass, seemed unnaturally loud in the waiting silence. Caleb checked his rifle for the 3rd time, then glanced at Eliza. "You remember what I taught you? Breathe, aim, squeeze, don't pull. And if someone gets close?" "The revolver, center mass, don't hesitate." He nodded, satisfied. Then he reached out and took her hand, squeezing it once. "Whatever happens, I want you to know." The shot rang out before he could finish. Instantly, chaos erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as riders thundered toward the ranch from multiple directions. The rustlers were shouting, firing wildly, trying to overwhelm them with noise and speed and sheer numbers. "Hold your fire!" Ben's voice carried over the chaos. "Wait for clear shots!" Eliza raised her rifle, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Shapes materialized out of the darkness. Men on horseback, at least 20, maybe 30. Far more than they'd expected. "Now!" Ben shouted. The night exploded with gunfire. Eliza picked her target, a rider coming straight at their position, and fired. The man jerked in his saddle but didn't fall. She fired again, and this time he went down, his horse veering away. Beside her, Caleb was firing with deadly precision, each shot finding its mark. But there were too many. The rustlers kept coming, wave after wave, some dismounting and taking cover behind rocks and brush, laying down suppressing fire while others tried to flank them. "They're trying to circle around," someone shouted. A group of rustlers broke away from the main assault, heading for the south side of the property where the defenses were weakest. Caleb swore and turned to follow them with his rifle, but they were moving too fast, using the darkness and terrain to their advantage. "I'll go," Eliza said, already moving. "No, wait!" But she was gone, running low and fast toward the south barricade. 2 ranchers were there, an older man named Dutch and his son. They saw the riders coming and opened fire, but there were at least 6 rustlers bearing down on them. Eliza dropped behind a water trough and started shooting. Her first shot went wide. Her second clipped a horse, sending it stumbling. Her third hit a man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The rustlers returned fire, bullets splintering the wood above her head. Eliza ducked, reloaded, came up firing again. Dutch was hit, going down with a cry. His son dragged him back, still shooting one-handed. One of the rustlers made it through, his horse leaping the barricade. He landed hard, the horse stumbling, and the man rolled clear. Eliza saw him coming toward her, saw the gun in his hand, saw his finger tightening on the trigger. She drew her revolver and fired. The man went down. Eliza stared at him, at the blood spreading across his chest, at his eyes going blank. She'd killed before, in the heat of chaos, but never like this. Never seen the exact moment life left someone's eyes. Someone grabbed her arm. She spun, nearly shooting before she recognized Caleb. "You all right?" he demanded. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Come on, we need to fall back. There's too many." He was right. Despite their best efforts, the rustlers were slowly overwhelming them. For every one they shot, two more seemed to appear. And they were getting bolder, pushing closer, coordinating their attacks. Ben's voice rang out. "Everyone inside! Defensive positions!" The ranchers retreated toward the house in an organized withdrawal, laying down covering fire as they moved. Eliza ran with Caleb, her legs burning, bullets kicking up dirt around her feet. They made it to the porch just as a massive explosion rocked the night. The barn was on fire. Flames leaped into the sky, illuminating everything in hellish orange light. The rustlers had thrown some kind of explosive, and now the old wood was going up like kindling. "The horses!" Mary Henderson's voice was anguished. "Already loose," Caleb said. "I saw Ben release them when the shooting started." They piled inside the house, slamming doors and taking up positions at windows. The rustlers had pulled back, regrouping at the edge of the firelight. Eliza counted at least 15 still standing, maybe more in the shadows beyond. Then she saw him. Victor Hale. He rode forward into the light, sitting tall in his saddle, looking like he owned the world. He was dressed like a dandy, completely out of place among the rough men around him, but there was something cold and cruel in his eyes that Eliza had never seen before. Or maybe she had, and she'd just been too blind to notice. "That's far enough," Ben called from the window. "You've made your point. Time to leave before more of your men die." Victor smiled. "I don't think so, Mr. Henderson. See, I've come a long way for this. And I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." "And what's that?" "Your land. All of it. Every ranch in this territory." Victor's eyes swept the house, and Eliza knew the moment he spotted her in the window. His smile widened. "And my runaway bride." Eliza's blood went cold. Caleb moved in front of her instantly, blocking Victor's view. "She's not yours," he called out. "She never was." "Oh, I beg to differ." Victor dismounted, walking closer with infuriating confidence. "You see, Eliza and I had an arrangement. She broke it. Embarrassed me in front of the whole town. That's a debt that needs settling." "The only debt here is what you owe these people," Eliza said, stepping into view despite Caleb's warning hand on her arm. "You're behind all of this, aren't you? The rustling, the attacks. You're the one trying to drive everyone out." "Guilty as charged," Victor said cheerfully, "though I prefer to think of it as aggressive expansion. I've got investors back east who want to turn this territory into the biggest cattle operation west of the Mississippi, and these stubborn fools were standing in the way." "So you decided to kill them?" "I decided to give them a choice, sell cheap and leave with their lives, or stay and lose everything." He spread his hands. Most chose poorly. "You're insane," Eliza said. "I'm ambitious. There's a difference." Victor took another step closer. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to come out here, get on a horse, and ride back to town with me. We'll have a proper wedding. I've already got the preacher lined up. And in exchange, I'll let everyone here live. They can even keep their ranches, well, most of them anyway. I'd rather die." "That can be arranged too." Victor's smile vanished. "But think about all these good people, the Hendersons, your husband, all those children cowering in the cellar. Their blood will be on your hands, Eliza, all because you're too proud to do what's right." "Don't listen to him," Caleb said quietly. "He's lying. Even if you went with him, he'd kill us all anyway." Victor laughed. "Smart man, that one. Too bad he didn't teach you the same wisdom, Eliza." Ben Henderson's voice cut through the standoff. "We're not giving you anything. Not the land, not the lady, not one more inch. You want this ranch, you'll have to take it over our dead bodies." "Oh, I will," Victor said pleasantly. "I absolutely will." He turned and walked back toward his horse. "You've got 5 minutes to reconsider. After that, we burn this place to the ground, with all of you in it." He mounted up and rode back to his men, who were already preparing torches. Inside the house, everyone was talking at once. Some wanted to fight to the last man. Others thought they should try to negotiate. Tucker was shouting that they should send Eliza out, that one woman wasn't worth all their lives. "Shut up, Tucker," Ben said wearily. "We're not trading people like cattle." "Then we're all going to die." "Maybe," Ben agreed, "but we'll die standing up." Eliza looked around at the faces. Men and women and children who'd welcomed her into their community, who'd treated her like she belonged. People who were about to die because Victor Hale wanted revenge on her for having the audacity to refuse him. She couldn't let that happen. "I'm going out there," she said quietly. "No." Caleb's voice was flat, absolute. "No, you're not. It's the only way." "It's not. He's going to kill you the second he gets his hands on you." "Maybe. But maybe I can buy you time. Give you a chance to escape through the back." "We're not running," Ben said. "And we're not sacrificing you." "It's not a sacrifice if it's my choice." Eliza looked at Caleb, willing him to understand. "I'm not the girl who got left at the altar anymore. I'm not going to let someone else decide my fate. This is my decision, my fight." "Then we fight it together," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Like we agreed. Together, or not at all?" Eliza opened her mouth to argue, but the words died when she saw his expression. The fear there, the desperation, and underneath it all something she'd been too afraid to name until now. Love. He loved her, and she loved him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a fierce, bright courage. "Together," she agreed. "But on our terms." She turned to Ben. "You said you had a fallback position, the root cellar. How many can it hold?" "Most of the women and children, maybe a couple men to guard them." "And there's another way out?" Ben hesitated. "Yeah. Tunnel that leads to the old well, about 50 yards from the house. Built it during the Indian Wars. Why?" "Because we're going to use it." Eliza's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. "We get everyone who can't fight into that cellar. Then we make Victor think he's won, let him burn the house, and while he's celebrating, we hit him from behind." "That's suicide," Tucker said. "No," Caleb said slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "It's smart. They'll think we're all dead or trapped. They won't expect a counterattack." "How many guns can we count on?" Eliza asked. Ben did a quick count. 8 men, plus you and Caleb. 10 total. "Against 15, maybe 20, Eliza nodded. "Bad odds, but better than sitting here waiting to burn." "And if it doesn't work," Tucker demanded, "then at least the women and children will have a chance to escape while Victor's distracted." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the plan. It was desperate, reckless, and had about 100 ways to go wrong, but it was also their only real option. "I'm in," Ben said finally. One by one, the others nodded. Even Tucker. They had 3 minutes left when they started moving people into the cellar. Mary Henderson coordinated the evacuation, her voice calm and steady despite the fear in her eyes. Children were passed down the ladder, mothers following with babies in their arms. The wounded were carried down carefully. Dutch was pale and bleeding but alive, his son staying with him despite wanting to fight. Eliza helped where she could, but her mind was already on what came next. The counterattack, the fight, the moment when everything would either fall apart or come together. Caleb found her as she was checking her ammunition for the 10th time. "You know this is crazy, right?" "Completely. And we might not survive." "I know." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "If we don't make it, don't." Eliza cut him off, unable to bear the thought. "Don't say goodbye. Not yet." "I wasn't going to." He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I was going to say that marrying you was the best decision I ever made, even if it started as just a deal. Somewhere along the way, it became real. You became real, and I love you too," Eliza said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too stubborn to admit it." Caleb's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. "We're quite a pair." "The worst." "The best." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate and full of everything they hadn't said and might never get the chance to. Eliza kissed him back, pouring every ounce of feeling into it, every hope and fear and promise. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "If we survive this," Caleb said, "I'm doing this right. Proper courtship, flowers, the whole thing." "If we survive this," Eliza replied, "I'll hold you to that." Ben's voice called from across the room. "Time's up. Everyone in position." Eliza and Caleb took their places by the window, rifles ready. The other ranchers spread out through the house, all eyes on the rustlers gathering outside. Victor rode forward again, holding up a torch. "Time's up, Henderson. What's it gonna be?" "Go to hell," Ben shouted back. Victor's smile was cold. "Wrong answer." He threw the torch. It arced through the air and landed on the porch, flames immediately catching on the dry wood. More torches followed, thrown by the other rustlers, until the whole front of the house was ablaze. "Now!" Ben yelled. The ranchers fired a final volley, then retreated toward the back of the house where the cellar entrance waited. The heat was already intense, smoke filling the rooms, making it hard to see and breathe. Eliza ran with Caleb toward the cellar. Behind them, flames roared like a living thing, consuming everything in their path. They reached the entrance just as the ceiling began to collapse, timber crashing down with showers of sparks. Ben was the last one down, pulling the heavy trapdoor closed behind him. In the sudden darkness, lit only by a single lantern, they could hear the muffled sounds of the fire above. The rustlers were cheering, thinking they'd won. "Everyone ready?" Ben asked quietly. Murmurs of assent came from the shadows. "Then let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with decent people." One by one, they filed into the tunnel. It was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch, the earthen walls pressing close on all sides. Eliza fought down a wave of claustrophobia and kept moving, following Caleb's broad back through the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, fresh air hit her face. They emerged near the old well, exactly as Ben had said, hidden by brush and the cover of night. The house was fully engulfed now, flames shooting 50 feet into the air. And silhouetted against that terrible light, the rustlers stood watching, mesmerized by the destruction. They had no idea death was creeping up behind them. Ben gave the signal, 10 rifles fired as one. The rustlers never knew what hit them. 5 men went down in that first volley, the others scattering in confusion and panic. They'd been so focused on the burning house, so certain of their victory, that the attack from behind shattered them completely. Victor was screaming orders, trying to rally his men, but chaos had already taken hold. The rustlers were firing wildly into the darkness, hitting nothing but shadows and smoke. Meanwhile, the ranchers had taken cover and were picking their targets with deadly precision. Eliza sighted down her rifle at a man trying to flank their position. She fired, and he went down. No hesitation this time, no sick feeling in her stomach, just cold determination and the knowledge that if she didn't kill him, he would kill someone she loved. Beside her, Caleb was firing in a steady rhythm, his face grim but focused. Every shot counted, every bullet brought them closer to survival. The fight was brutal and close. 2 of the rustlers managed to reach the rancher's position, and the shooting gave way to hand-to-hand combat. Eliza saw one of them coming at her, his face twisted with rage. She tried to bring her rifle up, but he was too close, too fast. Then Caleb was there, slamming into the man like a freight train. They went down in a tangle of fists and fury. Eliza couldn't get a clear shot without risking hitting Caleb, so she reversed her rifle and swung it like a club at another rustler trying to join the fight. The wooden stock connected with his skull with a sickening crack, and he dropped. Caleb got his hands around his opponent's throat, squeezing until the man's struggles weakened and finally stopped. He shoved the body away and scrambled to his feet, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody. "You hurt?" he asked Eliza. "No, you? I'll live." The fight was turning. The rustlers, caught between the ranchers' guns and the inferno of the burning house, were breaking. Some were already fleeing, spurring their horses into the darkness. Others threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. But Victor Hale was still fighting. He'd taken cover behind a wagon, firing at anything that moved. His face was no longer handsome and composed. It was twisted with rage and desperation, the mask finally stripped away to reveal the ugly truth beneath. "This is your fault!" he screamed at Eliza, his voice breaking. "All of this! You should have just done what you were told. You should have married me." "I'd rather burn," Eliza called back. Victor rose from cover, his gun trained on her. "Then burn you will." Caleb was already moving, putting himself between Eliza and the gun. But he was too far away, and Victor's finger was already tightening on the trigger. The shot rang out. But it wasn't Victor who fired. He staggered, looking down in confusion at the blood spreading across his chest. Behind him, one of his own men, Jack, the one who'd led the earlier raids, lowered his smoking gun with a disgusted expression. "I didn't sign up to die for your pride," Jack said flatly. "We're done here." Victor tried to speak, but blood bubbled from his lips instead of words. He took one stumbling step, then another, before collapsing face first in the dirt. Jack looked around at the remaining rustlers. "Anyone else want to keep fighting? Or are we smart enough to know when we're beat?" Weapons clattered to the ground. The fight was over. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the crackling of the dying fire and the ragged breathing of exhausted men. Then Ben Henderson let out a whoop that was half laugh, half sob. "We did it," he said, wonder in his voice. "We actually did it." The ranchers started emerging from their positions, checking the wounded, securing the prisoners. Eliza stood frozen, her rifle still clutched in her hands, staring at Victor's body. After everything, all the fear, all the running, all the fighting, it was over, just like that. She felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder, warm and solid. "Eliza." She turned to him, and whatever he saw on her face made him pull her into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest, breathing in the smell of gunpowder and smoke and him. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She just needed to feel him alive and whole and real. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "It's really over." "I know." Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "I just can't quite believe it yet." "Believe it." He pulled back enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You're safe. We're safe. And that bastard can never hurt you again." Eliza nodded, finally letting herself feel the weight of what had just happened. The fear, the violence, the terrible, beautiful fact that they'd survived. She looked past Caleb at the burning house, the Henderson home, the place where she'd shared meals and laughter, where she'd been welcomed into this community, was gone. Nothing left but ash and ember and memory. Mary Henderson stood watching it burn, Ben's arm around her shoulders. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but when she caught Eliza looking, she managed a watery smile. "It's just a house," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "We can build another. What matters is we're all alive." Ben nodded, though his jaw was tight. "She's right. Long as we've got each other, we can rebuild. All of us together." The other ranchers murmured agreement, gathering closer. In the firelight, their faces were exhausted and battered, but there was something else there too, something fierce and unbreakable. Hope. They'd face the worst and come through it, and if they could survive this, they could survive anything. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The prisoners were bound and placed under guard. The wounded were tended. Miraculously, only 3 of the ranchers had been seriously hurt, and none fatally. The bodies of the dead rustlers, including Victor, were laid out away from the house. Someone would have to ride to town come morning, fetch the law, explain what had happened. But for now, they were content to simply breathe and exist and be grateful they could do both. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky pink and gold, Eliza found herself sitting on the ground near what was left of the well, bone-tired but unable to sleep. Caleb settled beside her without a word, and they watched the sun rise together in silence. "What happens now?" Eliza asked finally. "Now?" Caleb considered. "Now we pick up the pieces. Help the Hendersons rebuild. Get our own ranch back in order. See what kind of life we can make." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "Unless you had other plans." "No. No other plans." Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. "I just wanted to make sure we were still, that is, our arrangement was never just an arrangement," Caleb interrupted gently. "Not for me. Not for a long time now." "Me neither." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Then we'll do this right. Build a real marriage. A real partnership. No more walls between us." "I'd like that." They sat there as the sun climbed higher, painting the devastated landscape in shades of gold and amber. Around them, the other ranchers were beginning to stir, making coffee over hastily built fires, sharing what food they had. Children emerged from the cellar, wide-eyed and frightened, rushing to their parents' arms. Mary Henderson appeared, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. She handed them over with a knowing smile. Thought you two could use this. Thank you, Eliza said gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm metal. Mary didn't leave immediately. Instead, she stood there, looking at the ruins of her home with a strange expression, sadness mixed with something that might have been relief. 30 years, she said quietly. 30 years Ben and I built this place, raised our children here, made our stand here. She shook her head. And in one night, it's gone. I'm so sorry, Eliza said, guilt threading through her voice. If I hadn't... Don't. Mary's voice was sharp. Don't you dare apologize. This wasn't your fault. It was the fault of greedy men who wanted more than they deserved. You didn't bring this on us. You helped us survive it. She's right, Ben said, joining them. He looked exhausted but satisfied. If you hadn't come up with that plan, if you hadn't been willing to fight, we'd all be dead right now. Instead, we won. And that's worth more than any building. Besides, Mary added with a sly smile, I was getting tired of that old house anyway, always meant to redesign the kitchen. Now I've got the perfect excuse. Despite everything, Eliza laughed. The sound felt strange in her throat, rusty and uncertain, but real. The riders came for the prisoners around mid-morning. The territorial marshal, a hard-faced man named Garrett, listened to their account with growing anger. When Ben showed him the bodies and explained about Victor's confession, about the organized campaign to drive out the small ranchers, Garrett's expression went dark. I'd heard rumors, he said, but I didn't think it went this high. Hale had connections back east, money, influence. Getting justice against someone like him would have been near impossible. Well, he's dead now, Tucker said bluntly. So I guess that's its own kind of justice. Garrett looked at Victor's body, then at Jack and the other prisoners. What about this one? He the one who shot Hale? He is, Ben confirmed. Turned on his own boss in the middle of the fight. That true? Garrett asked Jack. Jack shrugged. Man wanted to kill a bunch of innocent people over a woman who didn't want him. That's not business. That's madness. I'm a thief and a rustler, but I'm not a murderer. Not for someone else's wounded pride anyway. Garrett considered this. You'll still hang for what you've done. The rustling alone is enough. I know. Jack looked strangely peaceful with this. But at least I'll hang knowing I did one decent thing at the end. That's more than most men like me can say. The prisoners were loaded into a wagon, and Garrett promised to send men back to help with the cleanup and rebuilding. Before he left, he pulled Eliza aside. Mrs. Boone, he said quietly, I knew your former fiancé. Not well, but enough to know he wasn't the man he pretended to be. What he did, trying to force you to marry him, threatening all these people, that's not on you. You understand? Eliza nodded, surprised by the kindness in his gruff voice. Good, because you've got a real chance at a new life now. Don't let his ghost haunt it. He tipped his hat. Ma'am? He rode off with his prisoners, leaving the ranchers to face the aftermath. The work of rebuilding began immediately. The Hendersons couldn't stay in their burned home, so they moved temporarily to the Patterson Ranch, which still stood despite the earlier attack. Other ranchers took in those who'd lost everything, opening their homes without hesitation. Caleb and Eliza rode back to their own ranch the next day, half expecting to find it destroyed. But it stood untouched, exactly as they'd left it. The chickens had returned to their coop. The horses were grazing peacefully in the field. Even Ghost, the wild stallion, was there, watching them with his dark, intelligent eyes. Home? Eliza said softly, dismounting. The word felt different now, bigger, more solid. This wasn't just a place she stayed, it was hers, theirs, a life they'd fought for and earned. Caleb took her hand as they walked toward the house. Welcome back. Inside, everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise undisturbed. Eliza immediately set about opening windows, letting in fresh air and light. Caleb started a fire in the stove, and soon coffee was brewing, filling the kitchen with its familiar, comforting smell. They worked in companionable silence, falling back into the rhythms they'd established over months of living together. But there was a difference now. Before, there had been walls between them, unspoken boundaries neither dared cross. Now those walls were gone, burned away in the same fire that had consumed the Henderson house. That evening, as they sat down to a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Caleb cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous occupation." He smiled. "About what happens next. With us." Eliza set down her fork, giving him her full attention. "We got married out of necessity," Caleb continued. "A business arrangement, like I said. But that's not what this is anymore. And I don't want to keep pretending it is. Neither do I. So I'm asking, properly this time, without desperation or deals or any of that." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Eliza Carter Boone, will you marry me? For real this time. Because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but she was smiling. "We're already married." "I know, but I want to do it right. With vows we mean. A ceremony that's about more than just survival, a celebration of what we've built together." "Then yes," Eliza said, squeezing his hand. "Yes, I'll marry you. Again, for real this time." Caleb's face lit up with a joy so pure it made her chest ache. He stood, pulling her to her feet, and kissed her with a tenderness that was somehow more intense than all the desperate kisses they'd shared in the heat of battle. When they finally broke apart, Eliza was breathless and dizzy, and happier than she'd ever been. "When?" she asked. "Soon as we can arrange it. After the Hendersons get their house rebuilt, maybe. We'll have a proper celebration. Invite everyone. Make it a day to remember." "I'd like that." They spent the evening making plans, talking about the future in a way they never had before. Caleb wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy some land from neighbors who were thinking of selling. Eliza wanted to start a small school for the ranch children, teach them to read and write. They talked about crops and cattle and the possibility of children of their own someday. It was mundane and domestic and absolutely perfect. Later, as Eliza prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror above her wash basin. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable from the one who'd stood at that altar months ago. Her face was tanned and weathered. Her hands were calloused and strong. Her eyes held a hardness that came from seeing too much, too young. But there was also something else, a confidence, a sense of self that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion or approval. She'd been tested by this land, by the violence and hardship and endless work, and instead of breaking, she'd become stronger. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Caleb stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. "I know we said separate rooms," he began, "and I'm not trying to, that is, I just wanted to—" "Stay," Eliza said simply. He blinked. "What?" "Stay with me tonight. Not for, just to be close. I don't want to be alone." Relief and warmth flooded his expression. "Neither do I." They lay down together on the narrow bed, fully clothed, with Eliza's head on Caleb's chest and his arms wrapped around her. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. "I never thought I'd end up here," Eliza said quietly. "On a ranch in the middle of nowhere, married to a man I barely knew. Regret it?" "Not for a second." She tilted her head to look up at him. "You gave me something I didn't even know I needed. A chance to find out who I really am." "You gave me something too," Caleb said. "A reason to stop hiding from the world, to let someone in again." "What happened?" Eliza asked. "Before. You mentioned someone left you with scars." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "Her name was Rachel. We were engaged, planning to build a life together. But she got tired of the hard work and isolation. Said she wanted more than a rough rancher could give her. So she left. Took everything we'd saved and ran off with a man who promised her the world." He paused. "I found out later it was all a con. He cleaned out her money and disappeared. She ended up in a bad situation in some city back east. I heard she died a few years ago." "I'm sorry. I was angry for a long time. At her. At myself for being such a fool, but mostly at the idea of ever trusting anyone again." He kissed the top of her head. "Then you showed up. And somehow, you made me want to try again. Even though I was a mess? Especially because you were a mess. You didn't pretend to be anything other than what you were. Someone who needed help and was honest enough to admit it. That took more courage than most people ever show. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, their breathing synchronizing. Caleb? Hmm? Thank you for everything, for taking a chance on me, for being patient, for seeing me as more than just a burden. You were never a burden, he said firmly. You were a gift. I just didn't realize it right away. Eliza smiled against his chest, feeling something settle deep inside her, a sense of rightness, of belonging. She'd spent so much of her life trying to fit into a mold someone else had made for her. The dutiful daughter, the perfect bride-to-be, the woman who never questioned or challenged or demanded more. But out here, in this wild, brutal, beautiful place, she'd discovered who she really was. Not because someone told her, but because she'd had to fight for it. And she'd found a partner who didn't want to change her, who saw her strength and valued it, who stood beside her as an equal. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Caleb whispered back. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, safe in each other's arms. Outside, the frontier stretched endlessly under a blanket of stars. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the relentless demands of ranch life. But tonight, they had peace. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of rebuilding and renewal. The entire community rallied around the Hendersons, with every able-bodied person contributing to the construction of their new home. Caleb was there every day, framing walls and raising beams. Eliza helped Mary plan the layout, incorporating all the improvements she'd always wanted. The new house rose from the ashes of the old, bigger and better, a symbol of resilience and hope. During those weeks, Eliza and Caleb fell into a new rhythm. They worked side by side during the day and fell into bed exhausted each night. But there was joy in the exhaustion, purpose in the work. And slowly, the community healed. The territorial government sent investigators who confirmed everything the ranchers had said. Victor Hale's conspiracy unraveled completely, revealing a network of corruption that stretched all the way back to wealthy investors in New York. Several politicians were arrested. Laws were passed to protect small ranchers from predatory land grabs. It wouldn't undo the damage, wouldn't bring back the Patterson boys or the others who'd died. But it was something, a promise that their sacrifice hadn't been in vain. On a bright autumn morning, with the new Henderson house finally complete, Eliza and Caleb stood before the community once more. This time, there was no desperate bargain, no cold transaction, just two people who'd found each other in the chaos and chosen to build something beautiful from it. Ben Henderson, acting as informal preacher, asked them to speak their vows. Caleb went first, his voice steady and sure. Eliza, when you stumbled into my life, I thought I was doing you a favor. Turned out you were doing me one. You taught me that strength isn't just about surviving alone. It's about being brave enough to let someone stand with you. I promise to be your partner in everything, to respect your choices, to fight beside you when needed and hold you when the fighting's done. I choose you, today and every day after. Eliza's eyes were wet, but her voice didn't waver. Caleb, you gave me a chance when I had nothing left to offer but stubborn pride and a willingness to work. You saw past the broken girl at the altar and found someone worth believing in. You taught me that I don't need rescuing. I just need someone who won't try to make me smaller to fit into their life. I promise to stand with you through whatever comes, to build with you, to fight with you, to love you without conditions or limits. I choose you, freely and completely. When Ben pronounced them married for the second time, the community erupted in cheers. Mary was crying openly, as were several other women. Even some of the men looked suspiciously misty-eyed. The celebration that followed was joyful and raucous. There was food and music and dancing under the stars. Children ran wild while their parents relaxed for the first time in months. Stories were told and retold, each one getting slightly more exaggerated with each telling. Late in the evening, Eliza found herself standing at the edge of the celebration, looking out at the dark expanse of land that had become her home. Caleb appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good." He pulled her closer. "Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." Eliza laughed, leaning into him. "That's a tall order." "I'm up for it." They stood there together, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the sounds of community and joy and life continuing despite everything that had tried to break it. Eliza thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd run from humiliation into the desert with nothing but a torn dress and broken dreams. That girl was gone, transformed by fire and hardship and love into someone completely new, someone who belonged. Not because someone else allowed it, but because she'd claimed it for herself. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving. It took everything you had and demanded more. But for those strong enough to stand against it, it also gave gifts beyond measure. Purpose, community, a love forged in the hardest possible circumstances and proved through the worst trials imaginable. Eliza Carter Boone had lost everything at that altar months ago, and in losing it, she'd found so much more. Winter came early that year, sweeping across the frontier with a ferocity that surprised even the old-timers. The first snow fell in late October, blanketing the land in white and transforming the harsh brown landscape into something almost magical. Eliza stood on the porch, wrapped in one of Caleb's heavy coats, watching the flakes drift down in lazy spirals. Behind her, warmth spilled from the open door where Caleb was stoking the fire. They'd spent the previous weeks preparing for the cold, reinforcing the barn, stocking up on supplies, bringing the cattle closer to shelter. It was backbreaking work, but they'd done it together, falling into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. "You'll freeze out here," Caleb said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "It's beautiful, though." Eliza accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "I never saw snow like this in town, just dirty slush in the streets. Out here it's different, cleaner, quieter." He sipped his coffee, studying the horizon. "But also more dangerous. A storm can bury you in a day, cut you off from everything." "Good thing we're not alone then." He smiled at that, slipping an arm around her waist. "Good thing." They stood together watching the snow fall, and Eliza felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. Happiness had always seemed like such a fragile thing, easily shattered by circumstance or betrayal. But this felt different, solid, built on a foundation of shared struggle and mutual respect rather than pretty words and empty promises. "I got a letter yesterday," Caleb said after a while. "From Ben Henderson." "Oh, what did he say?" "He's organizing a winter gathering, all the ranches. Wants everyone to come together before the worst of the weather hits. Share supplies, make plans, celebrate making it through the year." "That sounds wonderful." "He specifically mentioned you, said Mary's been talking about starting that school you wanted. Thinks winter's the perfect time, when the work's lighter." Eliza's heart lifted. She'd mentioned the idea to Mary weeks ago, but hadn't dared hope it would actually happen. "Really?" "Really. Mary's already recruited 2 other women to help. They're planning to use them to community hall. Want you to run it." "I don't know if I'm qualified." "You're more qualified than anyone else out here," Caleb interrupted. "You can read and write better than most. You're patient, and the children already like you. I saw how they gathered around you at the wedding celebration, listening to your stories." Eliza remembered that evening. She'd been sitting by the fire when a small girl had climbed into her lap, asking about the book she was reading. Before long, she'd had 5 children clustered around her, wide-eyed and eager as she wove tales from memory and imagination. "All right," she said, decision made. "I'll do it." "Good." Caleb kissed her temple. "You'll be brilliant at it." The gathering was set for the first week of December, and as the day approached, Eliza found herself both excited and nervous. She'd been accepted into this community, yes, but teaching their children felt like a different kind of responsibility. A deeper trust. She spent her evenings preparing lessons, writing out alphabets and simple words, planning stories that would capture young minds. Caleb helped where he could, building a small slate board and fashioning rough benches from spare lumber. "You know," he said one evening as he sanded a piece of wood smooth, "watching you prepare for this, I keep thinking about how different things are now." "Different how?" "When you first came here, you were running from something. Now you're running toward something, building something that matters." Eliza set down her chalk, considering his words. "I suppose you're right. I spent so long trying to escape, first from Victor, then from the shame of being left behind. But somewhere along the way, I stopped running and started living." I did the same thing, Caleb admitted. After Rachel left, I buried myself out here. Told myself I didn't need anyone, that being alone was safer. He looked up at her, his eyes soft. You changed that. Made me remember what it feels like to be part of something bigger than my own pride. We changed each other, Eliza said, moving to sit beside him on the floor. That's what partnerships are supposed to do, I think. Make each person better than they were alone. He pulled her close, and they sat there in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind outside. The morning of the gathering dawned cold and clear. Eliza and Caleb loaded their wagon with supplies, food, blankets, the teaching materials Eliza had prepared, and set out early. The snow had stopped, leaving the world pristine and sparkling under a brilliant blue sky. Other wagons converged on the Henderson property from all directions. Families Eliza had come to know over the past months, their faces weathered but warm. Children bundled in layers of wool and fur ran ahead, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. The new community hall, built alongside the Henderson house as a gathering place for the entire territory, was already bustling when they arrived. Tables had been set up, laden with food contributed by each family. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, flames roaring high enough to heat the entire space. Mary Henderson greeted Eliza with a tight embrace. There you are. Come, I want to show you what we've set up for the school. She led Eliza to a corner of the hall where a space had been cleared and furnished with rough benches, a makeshift desk, and shelves already stocked with a few precious books. It's not much, Mary said, but it's a start. We figured we could hold classes 3 times a week through the winter. Give the children something to do besides getting underfoot. It's perfect, Eliza said, running her hand over the desk. Someone had carved decorative patterns into the wood, flowers and vines that seemed almost too delicate for these hard-handed ranchers to have created. Ben did that, Mary said, following her gaze. Worked on it every night for a week. Said if we're going to have a proper school, it should have proper furnishings. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. The kindness of these people, their willingness to invest time and resources into something as intangible as education, overwhelmed her. Throughout the morning, more families arrived until the hall was packed with people. Ranchers who'd fought together, who'd rebuilt together, who'd forged bonds stronger than blood through shared hardship. Their children played together, already best friends despite living miles apart. Their wives exchanged recipes and gossip and support. When everyone had gathered, Ben Henderson called for attention. The hall quieted, all eyes turning to him. Friends, he began, his voice carrying easily in the sudden silence. We've been through hell this year, lost good people, lost homes and livelihoods. There were times I wasn't sure we'd make it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But we did make it. Because we stood together. Because we refused to let greed and violence win. Ben's eyes swept the room, landing on different faces. We fought back. We rebuilt. And we're stronger now than we ever were before. Hear, hear, someone called out, and others echoed the sentiment. This gathering isn't just about surviving winter, Ben continued. It's about celebrating what we've built. Not just houses and barns, but community. Real community. The kind where we look out for each other, where we share both burdens and joys. He gestured toward the school corner. Case in point, thanks to Mrs. Boone here and several other dedicated women, we're starting a school. Our children will learn to read and write, to cipher and think. They'll have opportunities we never did. Applause broke out, and Eliza felt her face flush as people turned to look at her with approval and gratitude. We're also establishing a cooperative, Ben went on. Pool our resources for supplies, share equipment, help each other with major projects. The days of every man for himself are over. From now on, we rise or fall together. More applause, louder this time. Ben raised his cup. To community, to resilience, to the future we're building together. To the future, the crowd echoed, raising their own cups. The celebration that followed was joyous and unrestrained. Food was shared, stories were told, and music filled the hall as someone produced a fiddle and another a harmonica. Dancing broke out, clumsy and enthusiastic, with children spinning until they were dizzy and adults laughing like they hadn't in months. Caleb pulled Eliza into the dancing, and despite her protests that she didn't know the steps, He guided her through the movements with patient confidence. Other couples swirled around them, and for a moment Eliza felt transported. This wasn't the refined ballrooms of her youth, where everything was careful and choreographed. This was raw and real and alive. "Having fun?" Caleb asked, spinning her. "More than I can remember," Eliza admitted breathlessly. When the dance ended, they found themselves near the refreshment table, gulping water and laughing. Tucker approached, the man who'd been so hostile at the first meeting, with a sheepish expression. "Mrs. Boone," he said, removing his hat, "I owe you an apology. What I said back at that first gathering about you being desperate and all, that was out of line. You proved yourself 10 times over. You're as much a part of this community as anyone." Eliza was so surprised she nearly dropped her cup. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. That means a great deal." "Call me James," he said. "And if you need anything for that school, lumber, supplies, whatever, you let me know. My Sarah will be one of your students, and I want her to have every advantage." He tipped his hat and moved on, leaving Eliza staring after him in wonder. "See," Caleb said quietly, "you've won them over completely, not by trying to fit in, but by being exactly who you are." The afternoon passed in a blur of warmth and connection. Eliza found herself in deep conversation with the other women about curriculum and teaching methods, discovering that several of them had education they'd never had the chance to use. Together, they sketched out plans for the winter months, growing more ambitious as they fed off each other's enthusiasm. Meanwhile, the men were making their own plans, coordinated patrols to watch for winter predators, shared barn space for livestock, a system for checking on isolated families during severe weather. The cooperative Ben had mentioned was taking real shape, with each rancher contributing what they could and receiving what they needed. As evening approached and families began the journey home, Mary pulled Eliza aside one more time. "I want you to know how proud I am of you," she said. "When I first heard about you, the girl left at the altar who'd run off into the desert, I felt such pity. But you didn't need pity. You needed opportunity. And you took it and made something beautiful." "I had help," Eliza said. "From you, from Caleb, from everyone here." "True. But you had to be willing to accept that help, to humble yourself and learn and grow. Not everyone can do that." Mary squeezed her hand. "You're going to do great things with these children. I feel it in my bones." The ride home was quiet. Both Eliza and Caleb wrapped in their own thoughts. The stars were out in full force, the sky so clear and vast it seemed impossible. Somewhere an owl hooted, and in the distance a wolf howled, wild and free. "Happy?" Caleb asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Completely," Eliza said. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this all to fall apart. But it just keeps getting better. That's because we're building it right this time, on truth and hard work, instead of illusions." When they reached home, the house was cold but welcoming. While Caleb tended the horses, Eliza got the fire going and put coffee on to brew. By the time he came in, stamping snow from his boots, warmth was beginning to fill the kitchen. They sat together at the table, hands wrapped around hot mugs, and Eliza felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it almost hurt. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. "About?" "About family, about children." She watched his face for a reaction. "About what our future might look like beyond just the two of us." Caleb set down his mug, his expression unreadable. And I think I'd like that. Someday. Not right away, but eventually. Building something that lasts beyond us." A slow smile spread across his face. "I'd like that too. Very much." "Really? Really?" He reached across the table to take her hand. "I used to think my legacy would just be this ranch. Keep it running, pass it on to someone eventually. But the idea of children, our children, growing up here, learning to love this land the way we do, that sounds perfect." They talked long into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. It was the kind of conversation Eliza had never imagined having with Victor. He'd wanted children as heirs and status symbols, not as people to love and nurture. But with Caleb, it felt like a true partnership. Decisions they would make together, responsibilities they would share equally. When they finally went to bed, Eliza fell asleep with a smile on her face, secure in Caleb's arms and the life they were building. The school began the following week, and it exceeded even Eliza's hopeful expectations. 10 children showed up that first day, ranging in age from 5 to 13. They were shy at first, unused to formal learning, but Eliza's gentle approach and engaging stories soon won them over. She started with the basics, letters and numbers, simple words and concepts. But she also wove in lessons about the world beyond their frontier territory, about history and geography and science. The children soaked it up like dry earth drinking rain. One student in particular stood out. Sarah Tucker, the daughter of the man who'd once been so hostile, was bright and curious with an almost desperate hunger for knowledge. She stayed after each lesson, asking questions, begging to borrow books. "My pa says learning is important," she confided to Eliza one afternoon. "Says he never had the chance and wishes he did. He wants me to have better." Eliza felt her heart swell. This was why it mattered, not just teaching facts and figures, but opening doors that had been closed to an entire generation. As winter deepened, the community settled into its new rhythms. The cooperative Ben had established proved invaluable when storms hit, cutting off individual ranches but allowing those who were prepared to help those who weren't. No one went hungry or cold. No one was left isolated and afraid. Eliza's school became a central gathering point. Parents would drop off their children and linger to talk, sharing news and concerns. Problems were solved collectively. Resources were shared freely. The hall that had been built as a simple shelter became the beating heart of their community. In late January, a blizzard hit with devastating force. Snow fell for 3 days straight, wind howling like something alive and angry. Eliza and Caleb were trapped inside, watching through the windows as the world disappeared behind walls of white. On the second day they heard it, a faint sound, almost lost in the wind. Caleb was at the door in an instant, rifle in hand. "Someone's out there," he said. "In this weather, they'll freeze." "I know." He was already pulling on his heavy coat, wrapping a rope around his waist. "I'm going to tie this to the porch. If I get disoriented, I can follow it back." "Caleb, it's too dangerous. And leaving someone to die isn't?" He cupped her face in his hands. "I have to try. You know I do." She did know. It was one of the things she loved about him, his inability to ignore someone in need, even at great personal risk. "Then I'm coming with you," she said, reaching for her own coat. "Eliza, we're partners, remember? Together or not at all?" He wanted to argue. She could see it in his eyes, but he also knew her well enough to recognize a losing battle. They ventured out into the storm together, the rope their only lifeline. The cold was immediate and brutal, stealing breath and numbing exposed skin. Visibility was nearly zero, but they pushed forward, following the sound Caleb had heard. They found him huddled against the barn, a young man, barely conscious, his lips blue with cold. Eliza recognized him as one of the hired hands from a neighboring ranch. "Help me!" Caleb shouted over the wind, and together they half carried, half dragged the man back to the house, following their rope to safety. Inside, they worked quickly to save him. Stripped off his frozen clothes, wrapped him in blankets, forced warm liquid down his throat. It took hours, but eventually color returned to his face and his breathing steadied. When he could finally speak, his story tumbled out. He'd been caught away from the main ranch when the storm hit, got lost trying to find shelter, wandered for hours before stumbling onto their property, more by luck than design. "You saved my life," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I thought I was done for." "You're safe now," Eliza said gently. "Rest. You can stay here until the storm passes." The young man, his name was David, stayed with them for 5 days until the weather cleared. In that time, Eliza and Caleb learned his story. He was an orphan, working from ranch to ranch, trying to save enough to buy his own land someday. He reminded Eliza of herself in some ways, alone and struggling, but determined to build something better. When the storm finally broke and David prepared to return to his employer, Caleb made him an offer. "We could use help here," he said. "Someone young and strong who knows the work, pays fair, and you'd have your own room in the barn. It's not much, but it's yours." David's eyes went wide. "You mean it? After I nearly died on your doorstep?" "You didn't nearly die. You fought to survive. That takes the kind of grit we value." Caleb glanced at Eliza, who nodded her agreement. What do you say? Yes, Sas, David said immediately. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So their household grew by one, and Eliza found she didn't mind. David was respectful and hardworking, and having an extra pair of hands made the brutal winter work more manageable. More than that, it felt right. This idea of creating not just a family, but a home that could shelter those who needed it. Spring came slowly, grudgingly, the snow retreating inch by stubborn inch. But when it finally arrived, it brought with it a sense of renewal and possibility. The land emerged from its white shroud green and alive, wildflowers carpeting the meadows in riots of color. The school term ended with a small celebration. The children demonstrated what they'd learned, reading passages aloud, solving arithmetic problems on the slate board, reciting poems and historical facts. Their parents watched with pride that bordered on amazement. My Sarah can write her own name, Tucker said wonderingly. Can read words in the newspaper. I never thought I'd see the day. This is just the beginning, Eliza told him. Next winter, we'll go even further. As families departed, promising to return when the weather turned cold again, Mary Henderson pulled Eliza aside. I have news, she said, her eyes twinkling. The territorial government has approved funding for a proper school building, to be built right here, central to all the ranches. And they want you to be the official teacher, with actual pay. Eliza's hands flew to her mouth. What? Really? Really. Your work this winter impressed a lot of people. Word spread. They sent an inspector to observe, and his report was glowing. Mary gripped her hands. You did this, Eliza. You showed them what's possible out here. The news felt too big to process. Eliza had taught for the love of it, never expecting recognition or compensation. But the idea of a real school, a permanent institution that would serve generations of children, that was almost overwhelming. She found Caleb working in the corral and threw herself into his arms, babbling the news. He laughed and spun her around, his joy matching hers. A real teacher, he said. My wife. The real teacher. It doesn't seem possible. None of this seems possible, but it's happening anyway. That summer was one of hard work and deep satisfaction. The school building went up quickly, the entire community contributing labor and materials. It was a simple structure, one large room with windows on all sides to let in light, a good stove for winter, and real desks built by the various ranchers, each carved with the same care Ben had shown on Eliza's first desk. While the building rose, Eliza worked with David and Caleb to expand their ranch operations. The cooperative meant they could take on larger projects, breeding better cattle, improving irrigation, experimenting with new crops. The ranch that had been Caleb's solitary domain was becoming something bigger, more ambitious. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Eliza felt a familiar flutter in her stomach. She'd been feeling it for weeks now, accompanied by other small changes she'd been too cautious to acknowledge. Caleb, she said quietly. I think I'm pregnant. He went very still. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. You think? Pretty sure. All the signs are there. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. A baby, he whispered. We're going to have a baby. We are. He pulled back, looking suddenly worried. Are you happy? Is this what you want? More than anything, Eliza said honestly. I'm terrified, but yes, I want this. I want our family. They sat together as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple. Eliza rested her hand on her still flat stomach, trying to imagine the life growing there, a child who would be born into this wild, beautiful place. Who would grow up knowing the strength of community and the value of hard work? Who would attend the school Eliza had built and learn to love this land as she had learned to love it? What do you think? She asked. Boy or girl? Doesn't matter, Caleb said. Long as they're healthy and stubborn as their mother. Eliza laughed. Heaven help us if they are. We'll manage. We've managed everything else. He was right. They had managed everything. Violence and hardship, isolation and fear, the brutal testing of frontier life. And they'd not just survived, but thrived, building something real and lasting from the ashes of their separate broken pasts. The news of the pregnancy spread through the community like wildfire, met with celebration and advice and promises of help. Mary Henderson immediately began planning, organizing the women to prepare baby clothes and supplies. Tucker carved a beautiful cradle from oak, its sides decorated with the same flowing patterns he'd used on Eliza's desk. As autumn arrived and Eliza's stomach began to show, she felt wrapped in a blanket of community support. These people who'd been strangers less than 2 years ago had become family in the truest sense of the word, not because of blood, but because of choice and shared struggle and mutual respect. The school year began again, and Eliza taught for as long as she was able, finally stepping down in late January when her size made it difficult to move around the classroom. Another woman, Mrs. Patterson, whose sons had died in the fight against the rustlers, took over with Eliza's guidance and blessing. The baby came in early March during a late winter storm. Mary Henderson and 2 other experienced mothers attended the birth, while Caleb paced outside like a caged animal. It was long and difficult, but when Eliza finally heard her daughter's first cry, every moment of pain evaporated into pure joy. "A girl," Mary announced, placing the tiny, squalling bundle in Eliza's arms. "Perfect and healthy." Caleb was allowed in then, and Eliza watched his face transform as he looked at his daughter for the first time. Wonder and fear and overwhelming love played across his features. "She's so small," he whispered, afraid to touch her. "She's strong," Eliza said. "Feel how she grips my finger. She's going to be a fighter." Like her mother. They named her Clara, after Eliza's mother who died when she was young. Clara Boone, born in a frontier ranch house, welcomed into a community that would nurture and protect her. As Eliza nursed her daughter for the first time, she felt the circle of her life completing. Everything she'd been through, the humiliation, the running, the fighting, had led to this moment. Spring brought new life in every direction. Clara grew strong and healthy, her lungs powerful enough to make her presence known throughout the house. David proved invaluable, taking on extra work so Caleb could spend time with his daughter. The cooperative continued to thrive, with several new families joining as word spread about the supportive community they'd built. One warm afternoon in May, Eliza stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, her schoolhouse, watching children at play during recess. Sarah Tucker was helping the younger ones with a game, her natural leadership evident. Other children ran and laughed and simply enjoyed being young. Behind her, the classroom waited, shelves lined with books, walls decorated with student work, desks arranged for optimal learning. It was everything she dreamed of, and more. Caleb appeared, Clara sleeping peacefully against his chest in a sling Mary had made. He'd taken to carrying his daughter everywhere, utterly besotted. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, joining her in the doorway. "Just thinking," Eliza said. "About?" "About how far we've come. About how different my life is from what I thought it would be." "Better or worse?" Eliza considered the question seriously. If someone had told her 2 years ago that she'd be here, married to a rancher, living on the frontier, teaching school, and raising a baby, she would have thought it impossible. The girl she'd been couldn't have imagined this life, but the woman she'd become couldn't imagine any other. "Better," she said finally. "So much better than I ever dared hope." They stood together watching the children play, their daughter sleeping between them, and Eliza felt a contentment so deep it defied description. This was home. Not the house or the land, though she loved both. But this, the people, the community, the life they'd built together. She thought about the church where she'd been abandoned, about running into the desert in a torn dress with nothing but desperation driving her forward. That girl had been looking for rescue, for someone to save her from the wreckage of her life. What she'd found instead was the chance to save herself, to discover strengths she never knew she possessed, to build a life based on her own choices rather than someone else's expectations. And in that building, in that choosing, she'd found something far more precious than rescue. She'd found herself. The years that followed brought their share of challenges, harsh winters, difficult summers, the endless demands of ranch life. But they also brought joy and growth and deepening connections. The cooperative expanded to include a dozen ranches, then 2 dozen. The school grew, eventually adding a second teacher to handle the increasing enrollment. The community that had formed in desperation became a model for other frontier settlements. Clara grew into a bright, fearless child who could ride almost before she could walk. 2 years after her birth, a son arrived, James, named for Tucker, who'd become one of Caleb's closest friends. The house that had once echoed with loneliness filled with noise and laughter and life. Eliza continued teaching, finding ways to balance motherhood and education. She loved both, found purpose in both. Caleb supported every decision, every dream, proving time and again that he'd meant what he said about partnership and equality. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb took Eliza back to the spot where they'd first met, the rock formation where she'd collapsed in her torn wedding dress, certain her life was over. They stood together in the dying light, watching the same stars emerge that had witnessed their first meeting. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked, saying yes to a stranger's crazy proposal. Eliza didn't have to think about her answer. "Not for a single second. Best decision I ever made." Even though it was born from desperation? Especially because of that. Because it forced me to be brave when I wanted to give up. Because it brought me here, to you, to this life we've built. She leaned against him, feeling his strength and warmth, and looked out at the land that had tested and transformed her. The frontier was still harsh, still unforgiving, but it was also beautiful and wild and full of possibility, just like the life she'd chosen, just like the woman she'd become. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Closer by, their horses shifted and snorted, ready to carry them home. Home to their children, their community, their future. Eliza Carter had been left at the altar, abandoned and humiliated, with nothing but a torn dress and broken pride. Eliza Boone had built an empire from that wreckage, not of land or wealth, but of purpose and love and unbreakable community. She'd become a teacher, a mother, a leader. She'd helped forge a place where people looked out for each other, where children could learn and grow, where hard work and integrity mattered more than money or status. She'd become exactly who she was meant to be. And standing there under the vast frontier sky, surrounded by the evidence of everything she and Caleb and their community had built, Eliza finally understood the truth she'd been searching for all along. She hadn't needed saving. She'd needed the space to become strong. And in that becoming, she'd found everything: partnership, purpose, love, and a legacy that would outlast them all. The frontier had broken her down and built her back up, had tested every limit and revealed strengths she never knew existed, had given her a second chance and the courage to seize it. She wouldn't change a single moment, not the humiliation that drove her into the desert, not the desperate bargain with a stranger, not the long, hard days of learning to survive, not the violence that had forged their community. All of it had been necessary. All of it had led here, to this moment, this life, this unshakable foundation of love and purpose and belonging. Eliza took Caleb's hand, squeezed it tight, and together they mounted their horses. As they rode toward home, toward the warm lights already visible in the distance, toward their children and their future, Eliza smiled. She'd run into the wilderness with nothing and found everything. And she would spend the rest of her life grateful for every brutal, beautiful step of the journey.